Go. Welcome to another Founder Wisdom podcast. We have Katya Stepanov with us today. She's resolving your biggest people problems to create cultures of belonging. She's co-founder at the Inheritance Project, Ribis Immersive. She also is an actress and a game producer and a yoga instructor and so much more. She's a multi-potentialite. So it's going to be a fun convo today. We're gonna have Podpire present this podcast. Podpire is my podcasting company, and we help you start, scale, and monetize podcasting. So if that's interesting to you, if you want to get YouTube money, sponsor money, and lead gen money, you can go to podpire.com. Kat, welcome to the pod. Tell
Thanks.
me a bit more about yourself and what you're up to nowadays.
Sure. Yes. Thank you for the introduction. I always find it funny to complete a bio because I definitely don't follow the rules in terms of, picking one career or one profession. I think the thread that combines all of the things that I do is that I am fascinated by human connection and communication and how we talk to each other, how we relate. An inheritance project and the work that I do there really encompasses a lot of all of the different background and skills I have. I studied to be an actress. That was my first career. Acting is really like somatic psychology, where you're really becoming the other people, right? So you're learning about why people do the things they do in a very experiential way. And what I found when I, graduated from Carnegie Mellon, I went to Carnegie Mellon University and I came into the world of work and realized that a lot of learning is done on the academic level. Like we read a book and we think like, now I know how to resolve conflict, right? You read nonviolent communication or you read any kind of other leadership training and you think you know it, but then when you're in the real life situation, when you're in a conflict, when you're at home with your family, right? Like when you're actually in that place, it's really hard to remember all the things you think you know about something. So I think the key in all the work I do is giving the experience. How do we create experiential learning that helps people understand how to communicate better, how to actually resolve conflict when they're activated? And a lot of the background in performance and in acting has really transitioned into trainings and retreats and classes and workshops and all form of education that actually includes like rehearsal and the body and understanding what is happening to us when we are in real high stakes situations. So this focus on leaders and leadership and the work that I do with Inheritance Project is an amalgam of all the other things that I do. And outside of that, I just am passionate about getting people out of their like normal ways of being. So whether that's DJing on the dance floor, conscious dance floors, or it's like creating immersive productions, whatever is going to really bring people out of their normal, ordinary world into a space where they can think about deep things, understand their patterns, and actually learn new ways of being and relating in the world.
Very interesting. How were you as a child, and who were your parents? What were their education
Where
style?
did I come from? Where did I come from? I was born in Belarus, actually. I was born in Minsk, Belarus, and I was born 4 days after the USSR collapsed. And, when something that massive happens, there's no real date. It's like you kind of try to find, like, what day did the USSR collapse? It's not really how it happened, right? But in Belarus, my mother often tells me the story of seeing the TV go blue and, this recording of Swan Lake that starts playing. And anytime that happened, you knew something was going on in the government. And so the fall of the Soviet Union happened August 1st, 1991. I was born August 4th. Um, and I was born into Belarus, but it didn't have any of its own paperwork. So I think it makes sense that a lot of the work I do is around belonging and identity because I was born into a very confused place, right, where everything was in transition and my parents fled. So I came to the United States as a Jewish refugee in 1992 and we moved to New Jersey. So big culture change. My very young parents, my mother was in her early 20s, my father was in his mid 20s. I'm 33, I'm okay to talk about my age, and I look back and I think, wow, they were so young with me already and coming to the United States, not speaking English, no connections, right? Like total, total immigrant story. So I grew up in a lot of chaos and conflict and culture conflict and clash. I became the interpreter, right? I'm the first to speak English, the first to like be socialized in America in my family. So I was the interpreter of culture for my parents and vice versa. So it makes sense that ultimately I ended up doing culture work as my career, right? So I definitely think there's a link there.
And how did you get into acting? And can it be confusing to try to act as someone when getting a hold of yourself and who you are is complicated enough?
Great question. The acting came really organically because my parents didn't have, a lot of funds to buy me toys, but what they did have was the camcorder, and they would plug it in so I could see myself in the television. And that was the best entertainment. I would put on costumes and characters and dance and create. My parents were like, okay, she's a performer, right? What are we going to do with her? So they put me, I was a professional Latin ballroom dancer from age 3 to 13. That was the first kind of like hobby they were like, let's occupy her also because we need time to learn English, figure out how to live here. It's like, it was really, really crazy. So they found there, I'm so blessed that my New Jersey, where I was growing up, had a very robust Russian Jewish immigrant community that all had kids that they wanted to put into these extracurricular activities. So I was going to dance class and math class and learning about Russian history and poetry and all these things that those parents thought we were not going to learn in American schools, and learning Russian, how to write, read. So Russian, the Russian language, because it is the language of my birth, has always been with me, like even in my years in America. And I think that's pretty unique. A lot of immigrants come and like want to erase their culture, or like, and for various reasons, no judgment. Like sometimes you just want to get away from that, or you don't speak the language at home, and my parents were the opposite. So we were performing already from a very young age. So acting to me, I loved that experience of understanding culture through character, right? Through archetype, through, if you think about how I learned English through watching Disney movies. So Disney has so many American cultural ideologies and reference points, but also because I was growing up in an immigrant household where the culture in my house was very post-Soviet. That's how I would call it. It's like it wasn't indoctrinated because we fled, right? So there was a lot of awareness of like, my parents are very staunch anti-communists, right? Like big believers in capitalism. So a lot of interesting things in my household, but I could see the cultural differences, how my parents viewed success and happiness and family and expectations in life, and how it was presented to me by Disney or like by the American culture that I was being raised in. So I think because I was able to be so fluid in my identity, it's also what makes me open to embodying other people and other characters, because I don't have a fixed, it's like I have all these influences of who I am, but I understand how to put on all these other things. And it's actually what's helped me be an entrepreneur and do so many different things, because I can change myself depending on the context that I'm in. Does that make sense?
A lot of sense. But I'm so curious, how did you get into
Oh,
entrepreneurship?
how did I do it? I
Yeah,
mean,
like
through
was it a
school,
natural transition from like
yeah,
acting, improvising? Because yeah, that's like finances and stress. I believe you're in New York. The rent is
yeah.
incredibly expensive there. So how did you get into entrepreneurship?
Yes, great question. I mean, truly out of necessity. If you want to be an artist in New York City, you have to figure out how else you're, going to sustain your life, because the industry is volatile. So you could be the most talented actor in the world and still only work once or twice a year, potentially, depending on the projects, whether people are on strike or not. We've had a whole the pandemic was a huge disruptor to everyone that was in the entertainment world, whether you were in theater, any live events, right? It was like, we have no live events anymore. So I always have had an entrepreneurial spirit. I think witnessing my parents and witnessing like the incredible journey they took to understand how to survive in America and make money and, you know, figure out all these different applications of their skills. So I knew when I graduated from school. So I got into acting because I did musicals all throughout my education in New Jersey. And I was noticed. I was nominated for awards. I was like, I could actually do this, you know, if I really wanted to believe in myself. And I applied to all the best acting schools in the country, and I applied to all the top Ivy Leagues, and I made a deal with my parents that if I got into one of the top acting schools, they would agree to find a way to pay for me to go. And the chances that you're going to get into one of these schools is very, very small. So this was a very logical bet that my parents took. They were like, 1 in a million chance that she's going to get in to any of these programs. But I did get in. It's a, you know, success story. I got in to Carnegie Mellon. So I said, I have a real shot at this. You know, this school takes 13 people out of 3,000. Then you have a showcase in New York. I have an agent. So I started my acting career from a very solid foundation of like graduating from a top program, moving to New York City, believing in the dream. And then, of course, realizing like, even with all of that, it's not enough. So, what else am I here to do on earth? Was the question that I started asking myself. It's definitely not working in a restaurant. It's definitely not, you know, I was like, what else can I do? Also, what kind of job can I have where I have the flexibility that if I book a role, right now, I'm in an audition process for a role on a TV show. If I book this role, then I'm going to have to pause a lot of the other things I'm doing for a certain period of time to go film that. So whatever career I have, it has to be flexible enough. And I had enough self-belief that I have enough ideas, intelligence, experience, and grit to pretty much make a business out of whatever I'm passionate about. So I think that's what really makes me a multi-potentialist. I'm like, I bring in money as a DJ, I coach, I have 2 companies I'm involved in. You know, I sit on the board of advisors for a lot of different organizations. I think I found my way of understanding what I'm talented at and really finding industries and outlets where that is a great fit for me. And I don't commit to very long-term projects unless they're my own. You know, if I'm a leader in the organization, then I have the flexibility to create the life that I want. Right. So does that answer your question a bit?
Yes, yes, it does. Communication and I guess conflict resolution is really important in everyday life,
Yes.
especially as a business owner or an enterprise comprising various individuals. Do you feel that companies still want to invest in that and
Oh,
resolve
yeah.
this actual problem? Is there an ROI to that? To that, like how do you get your clients?
Yes, because if you start digging into it, and you can do it in so many ways. You can do it anecdotally, just asking your friends. Most people, when you ask them, like, how's work? Either they're going to say fine or they're going to be like, oh, I have this conflict with my boss. I hate my manager. I'm annoyed at this team, that team. Conflict eats up so much time, and time is money. And people are not actually working as much as they could be because half of their job, especially if they're managers or leaders in companies, it's like it's people management. It's dealing with personalities, dealing with different needs, different types of, and especially now we're in a global world. Like you have like this team in Japan working with this team in Sweden. They have completely different cultural approaches to work, right? So if you don't do the work to actually build a bridge culturally and build understanding between these teams, you're going to have conflict, you're going to have delays, you're going to have misunderstandings, and your time gets eaten up. So I believe that because it's so connected to how much money you're actually going to make as a company, you know, teams that work well together, they perform so much better. I mean, I can think there last year it was like $385 billion are wasted on conflict in the US every year in companies. That's a huge amount of money. So I think when you link it to the business outcomes, it's much easier to understand why this is an urgent need, to actually give your leaders and managers the skills to navigate and coach other people through conflict. So that's where we understood the most applicable link of the lens that we bring: inheritance, right? Inheritance, not like how much money you have or the property you inherited from your family, but what is your inherited conflict pattern, worldview, behavioral patterns, right? Like things that you inherited from your upbringing, your family, your culture, we all have it. We all have different versions of this. We learn our conflict style in the first 7 to 12 years that we're growing up, right? So it is related to our childhood. It's emotional. It's a nervous system pattern. So if you don't understand that you inherited this, you can't ever disrupt it and learn a better way. So we really come in to say it's kind of like an everybody poops situation. Like everyone has an inherited conflict pattern. There's no shame around it. But let's understand, what is it for you, right? What is your default pattern in the workplace, at home, with your relationship, with your friends, with your family? It's going to be different in every situation because there's context to everything. You might, for example, the four default conflict reactions are fight, flee, freeze, and fawn, right? And so you might freeze at work because that environment is causing you to have that reaction, but fight when you're in a conflict with your family, but fawn in a conflict with your boss. Like, so it really depends on the context. And when you start to understand where this pattern comes from and what your belief system is around conflict, then you can actually repattern and learn new skills. And the skills we teach, the 7 skills for challenging conversations, they come from many different great approaches to conflict resolution, but woven into one system that you can actually remember and practice. So that's really the key for us. We're like, let's actually practice this. You're going to take a conflict, you're going to work through it with these new skills, and you're going to actually have a new outcome to this. And then when you start learning it experientially, then it starts to become second nature. The way that you approach it, you start to realize the wisdom of how to approach things differently. And if people are interested in that, in learning more about that, inheritanceproject.org, we have free toolkits, workbooks. We have so many resources for people to just start unpacking, what is my inherited conflict pattern? What do I do about it, right? How can I actually learn a different way? And I really believe in it. I mean, I've done, thousands of people have done it. And I think our data is like over 90% of them say they use it every day. So it's a relational practice. It's something that you can apply to every area of your life, work or not, really.
Sure, but how do you get in? Is it cold email? Is it more relational? And who do you target as well? Is it head
Oh,
of
for in
function?
terms of our clients for this
Yes.
work. So
Yeah.
so in the past, a lot of what we were doing was really through referral, because we would come in to mediate a huge conflict, let's say in an organization, right? A Fortune 100 company, between two teams, like product and UX. That's a great example. Product and UX are often in a fight inside of inside of an organization because they are driven by different goals, and those goals are in conflict with one another, right? So it's like product always wants it to happen faster, UX always wants to do more research. You have like this constant storytelling that happens between these two parts of an organization. So if we're coming in and we're training all the leaders in our methodology there, and then the conflict is resolved, that company is like, well, you all need to take this training as well. So a lot of the work that we got really was through referral in the beginning, and also by doing workshops, right? And going and speaking at conferences, taking people through the process, actually going out there and showing people how these tools work in a short amount of time. And then because of the impact of the work, people say, okay, how do I bring my team onto this? Like, how do I teach everyone how to do this? So for the last 4 years, that's been the way. But we actually are about to change the way that we deliver this content, because we started this work during the pandemic. Live training was not really possible for, I would say, about 3 years, right? And now everyone's like burnt out on virtual. It's all our meetings are online. So I actually think you get so much more, and you learn so much faster in the moment. So from this point on, we're just going to be doing a 2-day immersion. It's very similar to the Hoffman Institute or the Hoffman Method. I don't know if you've heard of them, but I would say it's just, okay, so that's also like a relationship methodology, essentially. So you'll do a weekend and then 3 months of coaching with the group that you are in that immersion with. So that's a different way of delivering it that we're going to be doing from this point on. And I think it's much more what people want right now, because committing to a 8 to 10 week leadership course, 2 hours virtually every other week plus homework, like people don't want to do that anymore.
Yeah.
It was great when we had a lot of time and we were stuck at home and the only thing we could do was like learn online and connect online. But it's now really not interesting and not actually the best way to deliver content.
Right. Do you still spend time at Rebus, or is that like 5 to 10% of your time?
Yeah, I would say Rebus is more for special projects. So whenever there is an opportunity, a window of capacity, and it's making live immersive theater is of the moment. So it's like I'm sure that we will probably do productions every couple of years for the rest of my life, but it depends on so many other factors. So we mostly have done singular experiential things, right? Like an entire immersive production on Governor's Island for one summer. But doing a project like that, it's like a year plus of work on 1 month of performances. So it really is something that we paused on during the pandemic, and I'm excited to come back to it. I have a deep desire to do a very famous Chekhov play as an immersive experience in the next couple of years, but it really is just a timing timing question. So I would say that company, it's not something I'm doing day to day. It's much more if we have a project that we're working on.
And tell me about your podcast. What's your thesis behind podcasting? Why do you do it? And what have you got from it so far?
So the podcast it's new. So we're releasing it next year. We realized that one of the amazing privileges to the work that I do with Inheritance Project is I get to hear really deep reflections about people's identity and who they are and why they are the way they are. And I think that hearing reflections like that is very powerful for more than just me. So I started to realize like we should share these conversations that we get to have with a larger audience. So for Inheritance Project, we'll be talking to people who you might know their work, you might know their thought leadership, but you don't actually know the story of what made them who they were. What is their inheritance? What is their inherited conflict pattern? All of these more vulnerable, interesting, deep reflections is what the focus of that podcast will be. The goal for me is to humanize one another, to really see that it doesn't matter where you come from, what color skin you have, what your history is, what trauma you have. I would say, I'm going to make a brief, small generalization, that most people are working on the same kinds of challenges. So it's like seeing that, hearing that, understanding that, I hope to help with the polarization that we're experiencing around the world.
Yeah, around the world. What's your take on what's happening in the U.S. with the current elections, Ukraine, Russia?
Yeah.
Do you think?
I know,
Well,
who knew that all of my cultural backgrounds would be at war by the time I was 30? That was unexpected to me. I have Ukrainian heritage. I'm from Belarus, obviously, also, which is an occupied territory to this day. I mean, Belarus is the last dictatorship in Europe. Um, I This is why I'm so passionate about the conflict resolution skills, because what I do see is it's really easy to jump on an ideological bandwagon on any side of any conflict in the world. It's much harder to look in the mirror and say, where am I violent towards other people in my life,
hmm,
in my friendships, in my relationships, at work? Because until you find peace, like real peace and an active peace, I don't mean peace that's like bypassing, like we're just not going to talk about it. I'm talking about understanding, real connection, right? Real peace, real harmony with the people in your immediate environment. I think it's very foolish to think that you're going to be able to help any kind of macro situation. So I stand on that soapbox. I'm like, great, you want to talk about peace? Let's look at yourself. Let's look at, are you peaceful? Are you a peaceful person? Right? How do you make peace with people who are different from you? And if you can't solve that for yourself, then I think it's very arrogant to think that you can solve it on a larger scale. And I think it's just a really easy cop out from doing the work on yourself. So that's really my philosophy, my thesis. Like, you want peace, it starts with you. So do that work for yourself. And then when you get good at this, when you understand how to actually find common ground with people that you might ideologically completely disagree with, if you can actually find common ground and find a way to collaborate with, in a way like that, is then go teach other people, right? Go to the front lines, like give that to the, give that to the places on earth that need it. But I really think that if every single person started to learn how to be more conscious in conflict in their world and in their immediate world, that ripple effect is actually going to change society on a much deeper level. And so, I believe that everyone has a right to choose and decide what their own ideological worldview is. I think I'm a pretty radical thinker in that way. I would sit down to dinner with someone who hates me based on my identity, and I would want to have a real conversation with them. And I have the tools and practice to keep my nervous system calm in an interaction like that. And that's what I'm trying to teach other people, is like, these are skills you can learn. You don't have to be violent towards other people. That is just a animalistic inherited way of being in conflict based on survival instincts that we do not need anymore in the modern world. So that's really what I see.
Interesting. Yeah, what's the benefit of sitting down with someone that is like past saving point, quote unquote? Like, I'm very much of a win-win person, and yeah,
Yeah.
I can do
I would
charity
ask the
if you
question,
want,
like,
but
what does past saving point mean to you? Like, where is that judgment? Like, when do you decide that someone is past saving?
well, it's like how much time and energy you invest with them, and let's say that they spent like 100 hours with being indoctrinated by the Ku Klux Klan. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, it's quite hard. And also, yeah, how do you regulate your nervous system? Because I mean, I can tolerate, I mean, I have clients that are quite difficult. Now, there's obviously nothing near with what I just mentioned, but I view it as like training sessions in which I have more patience, to try to improve myself. And I view it as training, right? Break the muscle so it
Yes.
can grow further. But that's like
Because
one
it's
1%
really,
exposure,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. I think it's about what your intention is going into that conversation. So I would not, it would be a dangerous environment for me to sit down across from, let's take your example, a Ku Klux Klan member, even though actually for me less, because I'm white, blonde, and blue eyed. So we'd have to take into account that, like, I would probably be someone they might actually have a conversation with, right? Even though I disagree with the way that they behave in the world and view the world. Okay. So let's say we're on different sides there. I'm going to sit down with that person. I can only come to that conversation if my intention is to try to find a piece of understanding of why they think the way they think and what makes them the way that they are. Like, for me, it's I haven't I'm interested in that. I'm interested to understand what causes someone to have this belief system, right? So if I'm sitting down to understand them, I think I can be successful in that interaction because that's my intention. If I'm sitting down to try to convince them that the way that I see the world is right or better than the way they see the world, that's a very different intention in the conversation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, it does. But I already know why these people are that way. Like you mentioned,
You
traumas and
think
so
you
forth.
already know, though? Like, that's
Yeah,
what I'm saying. I think that we all think we know things that we don't actually know because we don't spend time actually asking questions of the real people we make these assumptions about. That's the thing. We have so much projection and so much, like, thinking that we um did you see what I'm saying?
well, it's there. No, but what I'm saying here is that they're probably traumatized individuals, and I can empathize with that. But I don't have much to gain to sit down with them and hear their toxic shit for like an hour, right? Like
Yeah.
maybe I would like 1% of the time for exposure and training purposes, and I can open my mind. But in the end, most of the time, it's trauma that has not gone heal, and it's people that try to cut corners, right? So they were slapped by a black kid at 6 years old, and after that, they wanted revenge, right? And they couldn't take that energy and sort of heal it in some other places.
Yeah.
And for that, they converted themselves in Ku Klux Klan. I mean,
But
it's
that's
interesting,
not
yes.
what drives people to join. So here's the thing. There's a great talk about this because I know we have a short amount of time today, but there's a woman named Dia Khan who actually spent a lot of time meeting with Ku Klux Klan members. That's why I'm bringing this up to you, because what she found, and she has a great interview that you can look up if you search Dia Khan, Deeyah, and then like Khan, Kahn, I think. So what she found is people become part of hate groups most often because they feel completely isolated, alone, and like nobody understands them. And they go to these hate groups because what those groups provide is understanding and is
Right.
connection and belonging. And if you can show someone who doesn't believe that anyone else outside of their community can understand them or even show kindness towards them or anything, right? This is how they stay in that cult, in that group, is because the thing they're taught is proven to them time and time again, because nobody gives them the time of day. Everyone assumes they can't change them. Everyone has abandoned them on an ideological level. It's like, you know what, they're past saving, exactly what you said, right? I know for a fact that treating it that way, like these people are past saving and there's nothing I can do about it, that's definitely not going to lead to a different outcome than the one that we see in the world right now. I do think that that if there were more people like me that are willing to have these kinds of conversations, which I have to figure out my own tolerance, right, and take care of myself. I'm not going to go have like a full day of meetings with people that I feel like are going to hurt me, right? But I'm saying, like, if that is something I'm willing to do, even an hour, right? And I say this because I've witnessed it. I wouldn't tell you something I haven't seen with my own eyes. I've seen
Yeah.
people who, if they met in the real world, would have hated each other, would come to my workshops and actually listen to each other's stories and come out of it being like, okay, something is different about the way I see people, about the way I see you, about the way I see myself. And over time, if those things keep happening, it's not like a one and done. I can't change someone in one conversation. So to your point about, you have to have discernment who you're willing to do this work with, which is why when I bring up conflict, I bring up the people in your life that you love and that you relate to the most. Like, those are the people with whom it's worth it to actually spend the time to try to understand them, to try to bring harmony and peace to those relationships. And you have to know how much time you have for other people and what you want to engage in and what you don't want to engage in. So I'm not unrealistic in the sense that you're gonna like spend time and resolve every conflict in your life.
Right.
There's gonna be a threshold that you have to decide on. But I think most people don't try to resolve any conflicts. Most of us are conflict avoidant, and this is what leads to violence actually in the end. So it's like there's a relationship between all these things. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, yes, it does. Yeah, some people accumulate all of that and then explode. Yeah, and in your case, you're great at empathy. You know, you have that special power. You're in business with that, so you have that potential. VS Meet, like not so well versed. Me personally, I try to like automate or have an AI do that, but we need
Yeah.
people like you definitely that yeah can sit down with these people. And when I say past saving, it's not true. It's just that you need to equalize the number of energy and hours that they spent like indoctrinating themselves on the other side,
Yes. Yes.
broadly speaking, right? But yeah, cool conversation. Where can people find out more about you?
Yeah, well, you can look me up personally. Katya Stepanov, my name. It's the same on Instagram. It's my website. And inheritanceproject.org is in all the work with Inheritance Project. And if you want the wild card of listening to my DJ sets, my DJ name is DJ Spasiba, Spasiba, which means thank you in Russian, Spasiba. So that's what I also say to you. Thank you, Spasiba, for having me on the podcast. And it's been really great to dive into this with you. This is, what I love to talk about. So thank you.
Thank you, Kat. So that was Charles Cormier and Katya Stepanov.